Good evening from Thomasville, Georgia. Tonight I'm going to discuss the Methodist Church. I have been a Southern Baptist my entire life, and I've always been interested in the Methodist Church. I always knew a little bit about how they baptized a little different from the Southern Baptists. They did the sprinkle method instead of the full immersion. But I didn't know a whole lot about them, and so I decided to look at them and go in depth with them. I broke this down into 3 stages. First stage I'm going to look at is the origins and basic dogma of the Methodist Church, and then I'll move into the impact of the Methodist Church on America, and then I'll look at some current issues that are impacting the Methodist Church as of today. To start off, we'll start with the origins. In 1729, 2 students from Oxford, John and Charles Wesley, formed a group called the Holy Club, considered the birth of the Methodist Church. Both Wesley brothers would come to Georgia in 1736 to try to establish a ministry, but it failed to take hold, and it kind of discouraged both of them in their ministry goals. They would return to England, and after a few years back in England, John Wesley had an experience, a reassurance of his salvation, and he started to begin to organize lay preachers and start an annual conference to bring preachers of Methodism together. At this same time, the Methodist movement would start to begin to spread to America. By 1771, Francis Asbury and Philip Otterbein began to help lead the Methodism movement that had been started 2 years earlier in the American colonies. Asbury would become one of the most important figures in early American Methodism. John Wesley, still in England, was not a big fan of the American Revolution. And he also was not wanting to split the Church of England. He wanted to try to reform it from within. After the American Revolution, there was not many preachers being ordained for the Methodist Church in America. So John Wesley decided that he would ordain some preachers and send them to the American nation. Those preachers would be Richard Walcott, Thomas Vassey, and Thomas Coke. They would come over to America to help lead the young Methodist church movement that was happening. And the Christmas conference would be held in 1784, and this would actually establish the Methodist Episcopal Church. John Wesley said that what God had achieved in the development of Methodism was no mere human endeavor, but the work of God. As such, it would be preserved by God so long as history remained. The Second Great Awakening would also have a major impact on the Methodist Church. It would bolster growth, and many churches would begin to pop up all throughout Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia. It was a big Methodist movement there. But there would also be some splits because of the issue of slavery. Not until after the Civil War was over would we start to see some of those splits start to not be as problematic for the Methodist Church. Wesleyan theology is tied to Arminian theology, and this is the basis for the Methodist Church. There are 3 major principles of Wesleyan theology. Number 1, belief in original sin. But Wesley rejected the idea of predestination and irresistible grace. He also believed in justification or salvation by faith, not works. Very similar to what the Calvinists believe. He also believed in something called Christian perfection, striving to be perfect through love. Wesley would never claim for himself that he had reached this point, but he had mentioned that other people may have reached this point in their lives. John Wesley would describe Methodism as the downright Bible Christians taking the Bible as interpreted by the primitive church for their whole and sole rule. Now we're going to move to some impacts of the Methodist Church on America. Probably one of the biggest impacts that I personally like, being as a minister of music, is that they established a rich musical tradition. Many well-known hymn writers were Methodists. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. Fanny Crosby, of course, wrote one of my favorite hymns known as Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. I use that song at least, once a month. I love that song so much. And then, of course, Charles Wesley, He would write over 6,000 hymns in his lifetime. And one of his more famous hymns, "Oh, for a Thousand Tongues to Sing," he would also write "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," which we'll be singing soon in the next month or so. So both of these people had a big impact on the hymns of the United Methodist Church. And of course, these hymns would also spread into other Protestant churches, such as the Southern Baptists. Another impact that the Methodist Church had was on women's role in Methodist ministry. Women were allowed a more prominent role within the ministry that you may not see in other Protestant religions. I know within the Southern Baptist Church, women are not to be ordained as ministers or as deacons. But in the Methodist Church, they are allowed to be ordained. Antoinette Brown Blackwell would be the first woman to receive an ordination for a preacher in the U.S., and this happened in 1853. Women were also given some other opportunities in leadership roles, like missionaries. Isabella Thorburn and Dr. Clara Swain would be missionaries. Dr. Clara Swain would be missionary in India. Women were also allowed to be deacons, as I mentioned earlier. Eleanor Davison would be the first ordained deacon in the United States, and she was ordained in 1866. And many women today are ordained deacons within the Methodist Church. Now, looking at a current issue that is impacting the church, that is an issue that is in America and across the world, is the issue of same-sex marriage and the LGBT community, and whether they are to be allowed leadership roles within the church, and whether same-sex marriage should be condoned by the United Methodist Church. They voted earlier this year by a vote of 438 to 384 that they would actually reinforce the denomination's ban on same-sex marriage and the LGBTQ clergy. So they are still not going to allow that, but you can see that the vote is close. And this is probably going to possibly cause a rift or possibly a split within the United Methodist Church over the issue of same-sex marriage and gay and lesbians being allowed to be actual clergymen or clergywomen. In conclusion, it's quite interesting to see how four faithful men of God, very humble beginnings, known as the Holy Club, were able to eventually get the church, the Methodist Church, to grow to what today, most estimates are around 40 million people worldwide that are part of the Methodist Church. And yes, the Methodist Church has seen some declines in recent years on their membership, but there is one country today that has seen the Methodist Church grow in a big way, and that is South Korea. So the Methodist Church is still having an impact, and it has not just an impact in America, but it's also having an impact worldwide. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.